Hello, and welcome back to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you've wandered here seeking gentle dreams, or simply need a quiet moment to let your thoughts settle like sediment on a calm sea floor, you're exactly where you need to be. Tonight, we're imagining something both impossible and oddly soothing. What would happen if all the water in our oceans simply disappeared? Not violently, not catastrophically, just quietly evaporated away, leaving behind salt flats that stretch beyond horizons and secrets that have been hidden beneath the waves for millions of years. Before we begin this strange and gentle thought experiment, I have a small request. If these sleepy explorations help you find a bit of peace, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me and to all the imaginary fish who would suddenly find themselves very confused about where their home went. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what body of water is closest to you right now. Are you near a restless ocean, a quiet lake, or perhaps just a bathtub that's about to become surprisingly relevant to tonight's topic? I'll do my best to keep this drowsily scientific, but fair warning, empty ocean basins are surprisingly fascinating. I hope this isn't so interesting that it leaves you wide awake contemplating underwater mountain ranges. But if it does, at least you'll drift off knowing exactly what treasures lie beneath the waves we never see. So settle in, let your breathing match the rhythm of gentle imaginary tides, and let's explore what happens when the water goes away. So let's begin this impossible journey together. Close your eyes for a moment, or let them rest softly on whatever gentle light surrounds you, and imagine something both beautiful and strange. Picture the ocean's edge, where you've stood before, perhaps feeling sand between your toes, or listening to waves whisper their ancient secrets. Now, let's imagine the water level dropping slowly, like an enormous bathtub drain has been opened somewhere deep beneath the seafloor. It wouldn't be violent or sudden. Think of how morning mist rises from a quiet lake, how water seems to simply lift away. That's how we'll imagine our oceans departing gently, gracefully, revealing secrets that have been hidden beneath the waves for millions of years. The first thing you'd notice would be the continental shelves beginning to emerge. These underwater extensions of our continents have been there all along, like the hidden foundations of a house. As the water drops, new continents would appear like sleeping giants, slowly awakening from an age-long dream. The east coast of the United States would suddenly extend hundreds of miles further out to sea. Britain and Ireland would be connected again, as they were during the Ice Ages, but this time by vast expanses of revealed seafloor rather than frozen land. These aren't small changes we're talking about. The continental shelf off the eastern United States extends about 200 miles out into what we call the Atlantic. Imagine standing in New York and being able to walk, on dry ground, halfway to Bermuda. The North Sea would become a vast plain connecting England to Denmark and Norway. A place where fishing boats once bobbed would become rolling hills of former seafloor, scattered with the strange geometries of offshore wind farms, now standing like metallic forests on solid ground. As the water continues its gentle retreat, something even more remarkable begins to unfold. The Mariana Trench, that deepest wound in our planet's surface, starts to reveal itself. We often say Mount Everest is tall, reaching 32 feet above sea level. But the Mariana Trench plunges down 200 feet below the surface of the Pacific. If you could flip Everest upside down and drop it into the trench, its peak would still be more than a mile underwater. Now, as our imaginary oceans evaporate, this incredible chasm opens like Earth's deepest secret being whispered to the sky. Think of it like an old map unfolding. You know those ancient charts where cartographers would carefully reveal coastlines and mountain ranges with delicate pen strokes? That's what's happening to our entire planet, but in reverse. Instead of explorers mapping unknown territories, the territories themselves are revealing their hidden geography. Earth's wrinkles are becoming visible, the creases and folds that water has kept secret for so very long. And then, then comes one of the most magnificent sights imaginable. The mid-Atlantic ridge begins to emerge from its watery shroud. This underwater mountain range runs like a spine down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, stretching over 10 miles from the Arctic to the Antarctic. It's a mountain range that makes the Himalayas look modest, not in height, but in sheer scope and grandeur. Most of it has been hidden beneath 2 miles of ocean water, known only to deep-sea submersibles and the occasional whale who might brush against its peaks during a particularly ambitious dive. Picture this ridge as it emerges. A jagged volcanic landscape splitting what was once the Atlantic Ocean into two distinct basins. Iceland, which sits on this ridge, would no longer be an island but the visible peak of an immense mountain system. You could walk carefully, mind you, along the very seam where North America and Europe are slowly pulling apart, where new ocean floor is born in bursts of volcanic activity. The ridge would rise from the empty ocean basins like the backbone of some impossibly large sleeping dragon. But here's what makes this vision almost meditative rather than alarming: the sheer quiet beauty of it all. These aren't violent revelations. They're gentle unveilings, like watching a curtain slowly drawn back from the world's most magnificent stage. The water doesn't disappear with crashes and roars, it lifts away with the patience of morning fog, leaving behind landscapes that are both alien and oddly familiar, like half-remembered dreams of what our planet looked like before life discovered the seas. Take a moment here to let that image settle in your mind. Breathe slowly and imagine standing on what used to be the edge of the Pacific Ocean, looking out over thousands of miles of revealed seafloor. The sun would set over mountain ranges that no human eye has ever seen above water. The horizon would stretch further than it ever has before, across landscapes that are simultaneously ancient and newly born. It would be like stepping into the pages of a geology textbook, but one written by poets who understood that Earth's story is also a love letter to time itself. As our impossible evaporation continues, what emerges is a world that would make even the most creative science fiction writer pause in wonder. The ocean floors, now exposed to sky and starlight for the first time in billions of years, reveal themselves to be anything but flat, empty expanses. Instead, they're landscapes of breathtaking variety and strange, quiet beauty. Vast salt flats stretch beyond horizons, glittering like fields of fresh snow under the sun. These aren't the thin layers of salt you might find in a dried lake bed, but deposits that have been accumulating for millions of years. Some places several hundred feet thick, with crystalline minerals that catch and scatter light in ways that would make the most magnificent desert seem modest by comparison. The Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah, where land speed records are set on impossibly smooth surfaces, would be just a small patch compared to these oceanic salt plains stretching for thousands of miles. But scattered throughout these gleaming expanses would be something even more precious: pools of water in the deepest trenches and valleys. Earth's last teardrops collected in the lowest places where gravity gathers what remains. The Mariana Trench would hold a series of incredibly deep lakes, each one a concentrated sample of what the Pacific once was. These would be hypersaline pools, so salty that very little could live in them, but so clear and still that they would mirror the sky like perfect liquid mirrors sunk into the earth. The abyssal plains, those vast underwater prairies that make up most of the ocean floor, would reveal themselves as gently rolling landscapes punctuated by the most extraordinary formations. Underwater canyons that dwarf the Grand Canyon would slice through the terrain like enormous scars carved by ancient underwater rivers. The Monterey Canyon off the coast of California cuts deeper into the earth than the Grand Canyon itself, and extends much further. It would become a chasm so vast you could fit several major cities in its depths. And then there are the seamounts underwater mountains that never quite reach the surface. Thousands of them dot the former ocean floors like a scattered archipelago of peaks, each one a volcano that almost was. Some rise over 10,000 feet from the surrounding terrain, tall enough to create their own weather systems in this new, waterless world. They would stand like lonely monuments in the salt plains, each one telling a story of fire and formation that took place in the darkness of the deep ocean, witnessed only by the most resilient deep-sea creatures. Perhaps most haunting of all would be the shipwrecks, scattered across these empty basins like ancient ruins in a desert. The Titanic, resting on the floor of the North Atlantic, would sit exposed on what looks like a vast, muddy plain, its hull slowly rusting in the open air instead of the crushing depths. Thousands of other vessels, from ancient Roman galleys to modern cargo ships, would dot the landscape like tombstones in history's largest cemetery. Each wreck would tell its story not through the filtered blue light of the deep ocean, but under the direct gaze of the sun and stars. But it's not just human artifacts that would be revealed. Whale falls, the places where great whales have died and sunk to the ocean floor, would appear as strange oases in this salt desert. These sites become entire ecosystems in the deep ocean, supporting unique communities of life for decades as the whale's body slowly decomposes. Exposed to the air, they would become fossilized monuments to lives lived in the vastness of the sea, surrounded by the scattered bones of creatures that once danced through liquid space, but now rest in mineral stillness. The deep-sea hydrothermal vents would present perhaps the most alien landscape of all. These underwater geysers, where superheated water rich in minerals shoots up from cracks in the Earth's crust, would continue their ancient activity, but now in the open air. Imagine walking across a barren plain and suddenly coming upon towering chimneys of mineral deposits. Some black, some white, some glowing with sulfur yellow, shooting steam and scalding water into the atmosphere. They would be like natural industrial sites, the Earth's own factories working tirelessly to process minerals from the planet's interior. The mid-ocean ridges would reveal themselves as the most active geological features on the planet's surface. These underwater mountain ranges, where new ocean floor is constantly being born, would become visible as chains of active volcanoes stretching for thousands of miles. The volcanic activity that once took place in the crushing depths would now occur in the open air, creating new land even as we watched. It would be like having a front row seat to the Earth's creative process, watching our planet literally build itself larger with each volcanic eruption. Take a moment to imagine this alien landscape. Picture yourself standing on a ridge that was once 2 miles underwater, looking out over vast plains of salt and sediment, dotted with the dark shapes of seamounts and the gleaming pools of hypersaline lakes. The air would be different here, thinner, drier, filled with the mineral scent of exposed seafloor and the distant sulfur smell of hydrothermal activity. It would be a landscape that no earthly eye has ever seen, beautiful in its strangeness and humbling in its scale. This would be a world turned inside out, where the hidden geography of our planet becomes the dominant feature of its surface. The familiar shapes of continents would still be there, but now they would be borders around these vast new territories of former seafloor. It would be as if the Earth had decided to share its deepest secrets, revealing the 3/4 of its surface that we've never truly seen, transforming our blue marble into something entirely new, still beautiful, but beautiful in ways we're only beginning to imagine. Now, as we settle into contemplating this transformed world, something subtle but profound begins to happen. Changes so gradual and quiet that you might not notice them immediately, but profound enough to alter the very physics of our planet. It's like the Earth is quietly rearranging itself, adjusting to a fundamentally different way of being. Let's start with something that might seem almost academic, but is actually quite poetic. Our planet would become slightly less massive. This isn't because the Earth is shrinking or losing material, or that water hasn't left the planet. It's simply changed form, floating in the atmosphere as vapor, or perhaps crystallized into clouds of ice high above. But water has weight, a tremendous amount of weight. The oceans contain about 1.37 billion cubic kilometers of water, and all of that water presses down on the Earth's surface with almost incomprehensible force. Think of it this way. Imagine you're carrying a backpack filled with books. The books don't disappear when you take off the backpack, but suddenly you feel lighter, your steps feel different, your posture changes. That's happening to our entire planet. The removal of that massive weight of water means that Earth's gravity field shifts ever so slightly. We wouldn't float away or anything dramatic like that, but sensitive instruments would detect that we've become just a tiny bit lighter. It's as if the planet has exhaled after holding its breath for billions of years. This change in mass distribution has other subtle effects too. The Earth's rotation would speed up just slightly. We're talking about minutes per day. Nothing you'd notice in your daily routine, but enough that over months and years, our clocks would need adjustment. It's the same principle as a figure skater spinning faster when they pull their arms in close to their body. With all that ocean water no longer spread across the planet's surface, the Earth's mass is distributed slightly differently, and so it spins just a little faster through space. But the more immediately noticeable change would be in the air itself. Atmospheric pressure would drop noticeably, not catastrophically, but enough to make everyone feel like they're living on a mountain. You know that slightly breathless feeling you get when you first arrive at high altitude, like in Denver or Mexico City? That would become the new normal everywhere on Earth. The air would feel thinner, lighter. Your ears might pop occasionally as they adjust to this new pressure. Why does this happen? Well, the oceans don't just sit there like a bathtub full of water. They're constantly evaporating, sending water vapor into the atmosphere, and that water vapor is heavy. It adds to the atmospheric pressure we all live under. Remove the oceans, and you remove a major source of atmospheric moisture, which means less pressure pushing down on all of us. It would be like the entire planet had been transported to a higher elevation. The really fascinating part comes when we consider what happens to weather patterns. Weather, as we know it, simply wouldn't exist anymore. Think about it. Where do storms come from? They're born over warm oceans, gathering energy from evaporating seawater. Where does rain come from? It's ocean water that has evaporated, traveled through the atmosphere, and condensed back into droplets. Remove the oceans, and you've essentially broken the engine that drives all weather on Earth. Clouds would become confused wanderers with nowhere to come from and nowhere to go. The remaining lakes and rivers would try to keep the water cycle going, but it would be like trying to power a massive factory with a handful of car batteries. Some clouds would still form from evaporation of remaining freshwater sources, but they would be sparse, thin, and unpredictable. The great conveyor belts of atmospheric circulation that currently carry moisture from the oceans to the continents would sputter and fail, like a magnificent clockwork mechanism suddenly missing most of its gears. And then there are the temperature swings. Oh, the temperature swings. This might be the most immediately noticeable change of all. You see, the oceans act as Earth's great thermal regulator, like a massive heating and cooling system for the entire planet. Water has what scientists call a high specific heat capacity, which is a fancy way of saying it takes a lot of energy to heat up and a lot of energy to cool down. So the oceans absorb heat during the day and during summer, then slowly release it at night and during winter, keeping temperatures from swinging too wildly. Remove this thermal mass, and Earth becomes like a house without insulation, a house where the heating system has been disconnected and the air conditioning has been turned off. Daytime temperatures would soar in many places, particularly in areas that once benefited from cooling sea breezes. Deserts, which already experience wild temperature swings, would become even more extreme, but the real shock would come at night and during winter, when temperatures would plummet without the ocean's stored heat to keep things moderate. Coastal areas would be hit hardest by this change. Places like San Francisco, which enjoys its famously mild climate precisely because of the Pacific Ocean's temperature-moderating influence, would suddenly experience weather more like an inland desert, blazing hot days, followed by surprisingly cold nights. The Mediterranean climate that makes places like Southern California and coastal Chile so pleasant exists only because of the ocean's influence. Remove that, and you get something much harsher and more unpredictable. The polar regions would face their own unique challenges. Sea ice, which plays a crucial role in reflecting sunlight and regulating global temperatures, would be gone. The albedo effect, the way white ice reflects the sun's energy back into space, would be dramatically reduced. Dark land absorbs heat much more readily than reflective ice, so the polar regions might actually become warmer in summer than they've been in millions of years, while simultaneously becoming brutally cold in winter without the insulating effect of nearby liquid water. But perhaps most poetically, the very rhythm of Earth would change. No more tides, those gentle, reliable pulses that have measured time for countless species. The moon would still exert its gravitational pull, but instead of lifting and lowering massive bodies of water, it would create barely perceptible flexing in the solid ground beneath our feet. The twice-daily breathing of high and low tide that has been Earth's heartbeat for so long would fall silent. As you settle into sleep tonight, imagine this quieter, stranger world, a planet learning to regulate itself in entirely new ways, like a great organism adapting to a fundamentally different way of being. It's a world that would challenge every assumption we have about climate, weather, and the delicate balance that makes life possible. And yet, in its strangeness, it would still be our Earth, still beautiful, just beautiful, in ways we can barely begin to imagine. Now, as we drift deeper into this impossible world, let's follow the water, what's left of it, as it begins a journey unlike anything our planet has ever witnessed. Picture, if you will, the moment when Earth's rivers suddenly find themselves without their ultimate destination. For millions of years, every stream, every creek, every mighty river has known exactly where it was going. To the sea. It's been as reliable as gravity itself, this ancient understanding that water flows downhill until it reaches the vast embrace of the ocean. But now, in our gentle thought experiment, the rivers arrive at what should be familiar coastlines only to find emptiness. Vast, yawning basins where the sea once waited. It would be like arriving at a train station to find that not only has your train departed, but the entire railway has vanished, leaving only empty air where the tracks should be. The result would be something both magnificent and melancholy. Rivers becoming temporary torrents, rushing toward these empty ocean basins with a kind of desperate urgency. The Mississippi River, which normally spreads into a broad delta as it approaches the Gulf of Mexico, would instead plunge over what used to be the continental shelf in a waterfall that would make Niagara look like a garden fountain. Imagine a cascade dropping not just a few hundred feet, but thousands of feet, sending the accumulated water of an entire continent tumbling into what was once the Gulf of Mexico. The Amazon River, that mighty artery carrying more water than any other river on Earth, would face perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. Currently, it spreads into a delta so vast it discolors the Atlantic Ocean for miles offshore. But in our oceanless world, It would become a torrent, cascading over the edge of the continental shelf, creating a waterfall system so immense it would be visible from space. The roar would carry for hundreds of miles, a constant thunder echoing across the empty basin of what was once the Atlantic. These aren't gentle waterfalls we're imagining. These are catastrophic cascades, carrying not just water but enormous amounts of sediment, fallen trees, and debris toward the lowest points of the former ocean basins. The energy would be tremendous, carving new canyons and valleys with breathtaking speed. Rivers that had meandered peacefully for millennia would suddenly become geological sculptors, reshaping the landscape day by day. But here's where it becomes almost meditative to contemplate. This wouldn't last. These magnificent waterfalls would be temporary monuments to a world in transition. As the rivers pour their contents into the empty ocean basins, they would begin to fill them again, not with salt water, but with fresh water. The deepest trenches would become the world's most profound freshwater lakes. The Mariana Trench would slowly fill to become a lake so deep it would take centuries to reach its new equilibrium level. Meanwhile, lakes around the world would suddenly find themselves promoted from supporting players to the starring roles in Earth's remaining water story. Lake Superior, Lake Baikal, the Caspian Sea. These would become humanity's most precious resources, the primary reservoirs for all life on land. Every lake would become like the last oasis in an endless desert, surrounded by landscapes growing increasingly desperate for water. The groundwater systems would face their own impossible situation. For millions of years, these underground rivers and aquifers have maintained a delicate balance with the surface water above them. Groundwater slowly seeps into rivers and streams, while rivers and rainfall slowly recharge the underground reserves. It's been like a vast underground circulatory system, invisible but vital, keeping the continents hydrated from below. With the oceans gone, this system would be thrown into chaos. Coastal aquifers, which once maintained a careful balance between fresh groundwater and seawater intrusion, would suddenly find themselves draining toward the empty ocean basins. Springs that have flowed for thousands of years would become torrents, then trickles, then memories. The water table, that invisible layer below ground, where soil becomes saturated with water, would drop dramatically as groundwater rushes toward the lowest available level. It would be like watching Earth's circulatory system severed. You know how, if you cut yourself, blood flows toward the wound? That's what would happen to the planet's water systems, but on an unimaginable scale. Every underground stream, every hidden aquifer, every pocket of groundwater would drain toward the empty ocean basins like water rushing toward a massive drain. The water cycle itself, that elegant dance of evaporation, condensation, and precipitation that has kept our planet habitable for billions of years, would stutter and break down like a clock with missing gears. Without the vast surface area of the oceans to provide evaporation, and without the thermal energy stored in ocean water to drive weather systems, the engine that has powered Earth's climate would simply stop. Imagine trying to run a fountain with only a tenth of the water it was designed for. That's what would happen to the global water cycle. The remaining lakes and rivers would try their best to keep the system going, sending up what moisture they could, but it would be like trying to water a garden with an eyedropper. Some regional weather patterns might persist near large lakes. The Great Lakes might still generate their own local weather systems, but the great continental patterns that bring rain to farmlands and forests would fail. The jet streams, those high-altitude rivers of air that carry weather across continents, would lose their oceanic anchors. These streams are driven largely by temperature differences between land and sea, and by the Coriolis effect of Earth's rotation interacting with these temperature gradients. Remove the oceans, and the jet streams would become confused wanderers, meandering aimlessly across continents without their usual guides. And in the midst of all this grand-scale transformation, there would be moments of unexpected beauty. New waterfalls appearing where none existed before, as streams find new paths to the empty basins. Temporary lakes, forming in valleys as rivers back up behind natural dams. Springs emerging in places where groundwater finally finds new outlets. It would be like watching the Earth experiment with entirely new ways of being, trying out different configurations of its water systems, like an artist sketching different compositions. But perhaps most poignantly, this would be the end of the great oceanic conveyor belt that has circulated water around our planet for so long. The Gulf Stream, the Kuroshio Current, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current, these vast rivers of seawater that have carried heat and nutrients around the globe would simply cease. The planetary circulation system, that has been one of Earth's most fundamental features, would go silent, leaving only the much smaller, more local circulations of remaining freshwater systems. As you imagine this world of redirected rivers and failing water cycles, picture the sound of it all, the thunder of new waterfalls, the gurgle of draining aquifers, the silence where ocean waves once crashed. It would be Earth learning to speak in an entirely different voice, telling water stories that had never been told before. And now we come to perhaps the most heart-wrenching chapter of our impossible tale. What happens to the countless creatures who have called the ocean home for hundreds of millions of years? This is where our thought experiment becomes less about geology and physics, and more about the profound interconnectedness of life itself. Let's approach this gently, with the same tender curiosity we might bring to any story about adaptation, loss, and the remarkable resilience of living things. Picture. First, the largest residents of our vanished seas, whales, those gentle giants who have spent their entire evolutionary history in liquid space, would find themselves in a situation that defies every instinct, every adaptation, every behavior that has kept their species alive for millions of years. Blue whales, the largest animals ever to exist on Earth, would be stranded on vast salt plains like massive ships run aground on an endless beach. But let's imagine this scene with the compassion it deserves. These magnificent creatures, who have spent their lives gliding weightlessly through three-dimensional ocean space, would not simply be abandoned. In our impossible scenario, perhaps we might imagine that the water retreats slowly enough that migration becomes possible, pods of whales making their way to the deepest remaining pools, the last refuges of salt water in what were once the ocean's deepest trenches. The sperm whales, those deep-diving philosophers of the ocean, would be drawn to the remaining pools in the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench, waters so hypersaline and concentrated that they would be like living in liquid mercury. These pools would become tiny refuges, each one supporting a compressed ecosystem, a fragment of what the ocean once was. Imagine these great creatures circling in pools, perhaps a few miles across, their songs echoing off walls of exposed rock that had never before heard whale music. Dolphins, with their playful intelligence and complex social structures, would face perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. These are creatures who live not just in water, but in relationship with each other, with their environment, with the vast three-dimensional highways of the ocean currents. Stranded in scattered pools, their communities would be fragmented, their ancient migration routes reduced to memories encoded in genes that suddenly have nowhere to express themselves. The deep-sea creatures would present us with perhaps the most alien sight in this transformed world. Fish that have evolved to live under crushing pressure, in eternal darkness, feeding on the slow rain of organic matter that drifts down from the surface waters, would suddenly find themselves in what we might call aliens in fish bowls, hypersaline pools open to the sky for the first time in their species' history. Imagine bioluminescent jellyfish, creatures that have spent millions of years creating living light shows in the depths, now pulsing their ethereal patterns under direct sunlight in pools that are more like concentrated brine than anything resembling their ancestral home. Giant tube worms from hydrothermal vents, creatures so strange they seem designed by science fiction writers, would cluster around the still active vents that now shoot superheated water directly into the atmosphere instead of the crushing depths. The anglerfish, with their haunting bioluminescent lures, would find their deep-sea hunting strategies useless in these concentrated pools. Creatures adapted for the vast emptiness of the deep ocean would be compressed into spaces smaller than most city parks. Their predator-prey relationships completely disrupted. It would be like taking the entire ecosystem of a vast forest and trying to fit it into a series of small greenhouses. But perhaps the most heartbreaking transformation would be that of the coral reefs. These underwater cities, these magnificent collaborations between animal and plant, would become calcium sculptures in the sun. The Great Barrier Reef, that living masterpiece visible from space, would transform into something like an enormous boneyard, beautiful in its way, but beautiful like a museum display rather than a living community. The coral polyps themselves, those tiny animals that build these underwater cathedrals, would perish almost immediately when exposed to air, but their calcium carbonate skeletons would remain, creating vast fields of white and coloured mineral formations. These would become some of Earth's most spectacular geological features. Reef systems stretching for thousands of miles, now revealed in their full architectural glory, like discovering that the ocean had been hiding cities more magnificent than anything humans have ever built. Some of the hardiest corals, in the deepest remaining pools, might survive in greatly reduced numbers. These would become the most precious biological treasures on the planet, living libraries containing the genetic memory of billions of years of ocean evolution, reduced to specimens in the Earth's last saltwater aquariums. The tidal pools, those margin worlds between land and sea, would become the planet's most important arcs of marine life. Every starfish, every sea anemone, every hermit crab in these remaining pools would suddenly become a representative of entire lineages of ocean life. These pools would be like seed banks for a future that might never come, preserving fragments of marine biodiversity in spaces no larger than bathtubs. Children around the world, who once went to the beach to discover the wonders of tidal pool life, would find these same creatures crowded into increasingly small spaces, competing for resources in environments growing more concentrated and challenging by the day. Each surviving tide pool would become a natural aquarium, but one with no aquarist to maintain the delicate balance of its ecosystem. And then there's the microscopic marine life, the true tragedy in miniature. This is where our impossible scenario becomes almost too profound to contemplate. Every drop of seawater contains millions of microscopic organisms. Phytoplankton that produce much of the oxygen we breathe, zooplankton that form the foundation of virtually all marine food webs, bacteria that recycle nutrients and process organic matter on a planetary scale. These organisms, invisible to the naked eye, but essential to the functioning of our entire planet, would face extinction on a scale that dwarfs any mass extinction in Earth's history. The phytoplankton alone produce an estimated 50–80% of the oxygen in our atmosphere. Their loss would mean that not only has the ocean ecosystem collapsed, but the very air we breathe would begin to change in composition. Each concentrated pool of remaining seawater would contain astronomical numbers of these microscopic refugees, crowded into hypersaline conditions that most could never survive. It would be like taking the entire population of a country and trying to fit them into a single building. The biological diversity that has taken billions of years to evolve would be compressed into a handful of locations, creating a planetary biological crisis unlike anything in Earth's history. But perhaps most poignantly, this chapter of our story reminds us that every drop of seawater was home to billions of living things. When we imagine the oceans evaporating, we're not just imagining the loss of water, we're imagining the displacement of an entire universe of life, communities and ecosystems and relationships that have been developing and evolving for longer than complex life has existed on land. As we contemplate this impossible transformation, we might find ourselves developing a deeper appreciation for the vast communities of life that currently surround us. Invisible and taken for granted, the ocean isn't just water. It's a living system so complex and interconnected that its loss would represent not just a change in Earth's geography, but a fundamental alteration in what it means for our planet to be alive. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might imagine the sound of the last whale songs echoing across empty salt flats, or picture the final glowing of bioluminescent creatures in pools growing smaller each day. It's a reminder that our blue planet's most precious feature isn't just its water, but the incalculable richness of life that water makes possible. As our gentle exploration continues, we turn our attention from the sea to the land, where an equally profound transformation would unfold, like a slow-motion symphony of adaptation and loss. The disappearance of the oceans wouldn't just change the geography of our planet, it would rewrite the very rules of how life on land sustains itself, starting with the foundation of all terrestrial ecosystems, the plants. Let's begin in the rainforests, those green cathedrals that have stood as monuments to life's abundance for millions of years. The Amazon rainforest, often called the lungs of the earth, exists in a delicate dance with the water cycle that our vanished oceans once orchestrated. The forest receives moisture not just from local rainfall, but from vast weather systems that originate over the Atlantic Ocean, carrying water vapor thousands of miles inland to nourish trees that have never seen the sea. Without the oceans to generate these moisture-laden winds, the rainforests would begin a slow transformation that would be both heartbreaking and strangely beautiful. Picture the Amazon as rain becomes increasingly rare, the great green cathedrals slowly becoming brown, not all at once, but in a gradual progression that would take months or years to complete. The emergent layer, those towering giants that reach above the canopy, would be the first to show stress, their leaves yellowing and falling like confetti in a celebration that no one asked for. The understory plants, accustomed to the dim, humid environment beneath the canopy, would find themselves in an increasingly harsh world as the forest opens up and dries out. Ferns that have thrived in perpetual twilight for millions of years would curl and brown. Orchids that have spent generations perfecting their relationship with specific pollinators would simply fade, their elaborate flowers becoming memories pressed between the pages of Earth's changing story. But here's what makes this transformation almost meditative rather than simply tragic. It wouldn't happen all at once. Forest ecosystems have remarkable resilience, built up over millions of years of surviving droughts, floods, and other challenges. Some trees would adapt, drawing deeper on groundwater reserves, developing smaller leaves to conserve moisture, changing their entire life strategy to survive in this new, drier world. The cloud forests, those mystical ecosystems that exist in the clouds themselves, literally harvesting moisture from the air, would face perhaps the most poetic extinction of all. These forests, found on mountain slopes around the world, exist because of the reliable formation of clouds at specific elevations. Without oceanic moisture to feed these cloud systems, these forests would simply evaporate like morning mist, leaving behind landscapes that look like the ghost outlines of what was once there. Coastal vegetation would experience its own unique crisis of identity. Mangrove forests, those remarkable trees that have learned to live with their roots in salt water, would find themselves stranded on increasingly dry salt flats. These forests, which serve as nurseries for countless marine species and barriers against storm surges, would become monuments to a relationship between land and sea that no longer exists. The mangrove roots, so perfectly adapted for filtering salt water, would find themselves anchored in crystalline salt deposits that sparkle in the sun like fields of diamonds. Salt marshes and coastal wetlands would face a similar fate, but perhaps with more hope for adaptation. Some of these plants, having evolved to handle the stress of salt spray and periodic flooding, might prove surprisingly resilient in the face of increased salinity from wind-blown salt deposits. Spartina grass, which thrives in salt marshes, might find itself spreading inland, colonizing new territories as one of the few plants capable of handling the increased salinity of this new world. Agriculture would face an immediate crisis that would fundamentally reshape human civilization. Wheat fields that have depended on reliable precipitation patterns would find themselves dreaming of rain that simply doesn't come. The great grain belts of the world, the American Midwest, the Ukrainian steppes, the Australian wheatlands, would be transformed from breadbaskets into something more resembling the dust bowls of the 1930s, but on a planetary scale. Rice cultivation, which feeds more than half the world's population, would face perhaps the greatest challenge of all. Rice paddies require not just water, but specific cycles of flooding and draining that mimic the natural rhythm of monsoon seasons. Without oceanic moisture to drive monsoon systems, rice cultivation would become impossible in most regions, forcing humanity to completely reimagine its relationship with food production. But here's where the story becomes unexpectedly hopeful. Some plants would not just survive, but thrive in this new world. Desert species, which have spent millions of years perfecting the art of water conservation, would suddenly find themselves in a world designed for their particular talents. Cacti, succulents, and other xerophytic plants would experience a brief period of evolutionary triumph, like understudies suddenly called to take the starring roles in Earth's botanical drama. The Sonoran Desert's iconic saguaro cacti, those majestic giants that can live for 200 years while storing thousands of gallons of water in their tissues, would find themselves among the most successful species on the planet. Desert plants that reproduce only during rare rainfall events would suddenly find their conservative strategies paying off. They would become the teachers for the rest of the plant kingdom, demonstrating how to live gracefully with scarcity. Bryophytes, mosses, and liverworts would also find new opportunities. These ancient plants, some of the first to colonize land hundreds of millions of years ago, are remarkably efficient at capturing moisture from the air. In a world where atmospheric humidity comes only from the remaining lakes and rivers, these humble plants might become surprisingly important, forming the foundation for new types of ecosystems that we can barely imagine. Trees that have spent generations developing deep taproot systems would find themselves with significant advantages. Mesquite trees, which can send roots down more than 100 feet to reach groundwater, would become the monarchs of this new world. Oak trees, with their massive root systems and ability to go dormant during dry periods, would outlast many more spectacular but less resilient species. The gentle tragedy of plant extinction would be balanced by the quiet miracle of adaptation. We would witness evolution in fast forward, as surviving plants quickly adapt to new conditions. Seeds that have been lying dormant in the soil for decades waiting for the right conditions, might suddenly find this new world exactly what they've been waiting for. Desert wildflower seeds, adapted to germinate only during rare rainfall events, might begin to germinate in response to the morning dew that becomes increasingly important in this drier world. Pollination relationships would be completely disrupted and then reformed. Bees that once followed predictable flower blooms across vast landscapes would need to develop new migration patterns. Some plants might begin to rely more heavily on wind pollination, while others might develop new relationships with the species that prove most adaptable to the changing world. Urban plants, those hardy species that have learned to thrive in concrete jungles and parking lots, would suddenly find their skills in high demand. Tree species that can survive on minimal water and handle high concentrations of salt and other minerals would become the foundation for new urban forests designed for this harsher world. As you settle into rest tonight, imagine walking through a forest in transition, some trees still green and defiant, others gracefully releasing their leaves like letting go of old dreams, and new shoots emerging from the ground, representing life's irrepressible urge to adapt and continue. It would be a world where every green leaf becomes precious, where every successful adaptation represents a small victory in the ongoing story of life, finding a way to persist even when the fundamental rules of existence have changed. This would be Earth learning to garden itself differently, discovering new relationships between plants and the environment, writing new chapters in the 4 billion-year story of life on land. The morning you realize that you've become the kind of meerkat who makes disapproving sounds at juvenile behavior is the same morning you understand that age isn't just about accumulated time, it's about accumulated irritation with people who haven't learned the lessons you've already paid for, in stress, mistakes, and the occasional near-death experience. You're observing the latest crop of young adults attempt what they optimistically call advanced foraging techniques, and what you recognize as variations on mistakes you made years ago, refined with the kind of creative incompetence that suggests they've managed to find entirely new ways to do familiar things wrong. That's not how you assess soil composition, you mutter, watching Dash, who's apparently inherited his name from someone with a sense of irony. Since his approach to most activities resembles controlled falling, dig enthusiastically in ground that any experienced forager would recognize as completely unsuitable for beetle habitat. The meerkat beside you, a patient adult named Steady, who's been assigned to supervise this educational disaster, nods with the weary resignation of someone who's heard similar commentary from you with increasing frequency. Different learning styles. Steady offers diplomatically, which you recognize as the kind of tactful response that translates to, yes, they're doing it wrong, but criticism isn't helping the situation. Different learning styles. You repeat with the tone of someone who's reached the age where diplomatic responses feel less important than accurate observations. When I was their age, different learning styles meant you learned fast or you became something else's learning experience. This comment earns you a look that suggests your reputation for patient mentorship is evolving into something more closely resembling chronic dissatisfaction with the educational standards of younger generations. The transition from active leadership to advisory role happens gradually, marked by subtle changes in how others interact with your opinions and how you approach daily responsibilities. Your physical capabilities remain adequate for most routine activities, but your energy levels have shifted toward conservation rather than expenditure, and your patience for activities that don't directly contribute to survival has diminished considerably. You find yourself assigned to what the group diplomatically describes as strategic oversight, and what you recognize as keeping the grumpy elder occupied with responsibilities that make use of his experience while limiting his opportunities to criticize everyone else's technique. The role involves territory assessment, environmental monitoring, and long-term strategic planning that draws on your accumulated knowledge of seasonal patterns, resource availability, and the historical behavior of various threats and opportunities in your area. It's intellectually satisfying work that makes use of your expertise while requiring less of the physical activity that's become more taxing than it used to be. Your environmental perspective has evolved to encompass patterns that span multiple years and seasonal cycles. You've witnessed enough repetitions of drought and abundance, territorial disputes and resolutions, successful migrations and costly mistakes, to understand the deeper rhythms that govern survival in the desert ecosystem. This long-term perspective provides strategic value to the group, but it also creates a certain impatience with decisions that seem to ignore lessons you've already learned through direct experience. When the current leadership proposes territorial expansion into areas you remember as problematic, or resource management strategies that you've seen fail during previous scarcity periods, your responses tend toward the blunt rather than the diplomatic. That water source. You inform the planning committee during a discussion about emergency resource locations, becomes unreliable during extended dry periods. We discovered this during the drought 7 seasons ago, when 3 different groups competed for access, and the resulting territorial disputes created more problems than the water access solved. The committee receives this information with appropriate gratitude, but you notice the subtle expressions that suggest they're also noting your tendency to preface observations with historical context that emphasizes your greater experience and their comparative ignorance. Your wisdom-sharing activities have expanded beyond formal teaching to include a running commentary on current events that draws heavily on historical precedent, and frequently concludes with variations on the theme that previous generations handled similar situations with greater competence and less drama. Juvenile training, you observed during a discussion about educational methodology, used to focus on practical survival skills rather than self-esteem maintenance. Students learned quickly because the alternative was becoming educational examples for the next group. These observations are technically accurate and strategically useful, but they're delivered with a tone that suggests the current approach to most activities represents a decline from the superior standards that prevailed during your own development period. The patience that was once your strength as a mentor has been replaced by a more selective application of tolerance that reserves understanding for genuine effort and maintains minimal sympathy for preventable mistakes. Your teaching style has evolved from encouraging guidance to pointed commentary that emphasizes the consequences of poor decision-making. Experience. You explain to a group of juveniles who've just returned from an unsuccessful foraging expedition that involved more enthusiasm than technique, is what you get when you don't get what you wanted. You wanted beetles. You got education about why proper soil assessment matters. The beetles, meanwhile, remained safely hidden from your random excavation approach. This educational philosophy produces learning, but it also produces the kind of respectful distance that develops between students and instructors, whose standards for acceptable performance have been calibrated by years of witnessing the costs of incompetence. Your environmental monitoring responsibilities provide opportunities for the kind of extended observation and analysis that suits your current energy levels, while contributing meaningfully to group welfare. You've become the living repository of local environmental knowledge, capable of predicting seasonal changes, identifying developing threats, and recognizing opportunities that others might miss. The work is intellectually satisfying in ways that physical activities no longer are, requiring the kind of pattern recognition and analytical thinking that benefits from accumulated experience rather than peak physical performance. Your assessments carry weight because they're based on data sets that span years rather than seasons, providing perspective that's valuable for strategic planning and risk management. But the role also involves a certain isolation from the immediate activities that define daily life for the younger and more physically active members of the group. Your participation in routine operations becomes advisory rather than direct, and your social interactions increasingly focus on formal consultation rather than casual cooperation. You've reached the age where your main job is complaining about how things used to be better, which is both professionally satisfying and socially limiting. The younger meerkats respect your expertise but avoid your company, and your peer group has gradually diminished through the natural processes that make elder status a somewhat solitary achievement. The desert around you remains constant while you change, providing the kind of environmental stability that makes personal evolution more noticeable by contrast. The landscape that once seemed vast and intimidating now feels familiar and manageable, reduced to known patterns and predictable variations that hold few surprises for someone who's observed them across multiple decades. Your relationship with the environment has evolved from fearful adaptation to confident mastery, but also to a certain weariness with the endless repetition of seasonal cycles, territorial disputes, resource scarcity, and the continuous educational requirements of helping inexperienced meerkats avoid making the mistakes you've already witnessed too many times. The realization that you've become indispensable comes not through dramatic recognition or formal ceremonies, but through the gradual accumulation of moments when others turn to you for information that exists nowhere else but in your memory. You've become the living archive of local environmental knowledge, the institutional memory that connects current decisions to historical outcomes, the repository of hard-won wisdom that's taken decades to accumulate and can't be quickly replaced. Your mentorship capabilities have evolved beyond basic skill instruction to encompass the kind of comprehensive environmental education that transforms novice survivors into competent contributors to group welfare. The teaching techniques you've developed combine practical demonstration with historical context, providing students with both immediate skills and the broader understanding that enables independent problem-solving in novel situations. Effective beetle hunting, you explain to the current group of students during a comprehensive foraging lesson, requires understanding not just current beetle behavior but seasonal variation patterns, soil-moisture relationships, predator pressure effects, and the historical productivity of different terrain types during various weather conditions. The lesson that follows draws on years of accumulated observation and analysis, providing students with environmental literacy that extends far beyond simple technique instruction. You teach pattern recognition skills that enable adaptive response to changing conditions, strategic thinking that balances immediate needs with long-term sustainability, and the kind of systematic approach to problem-solving that transforms survival from desperate improvisation into methodical competence. Your territory knowledge has become encyclopedic, encompassing not just current conditions, but historical trends, seasonal variations, and the kind of long-term environmental changes that affect strategic planning and resource management. You can predict water availability during different phases of drought cycles, identify areas where beetle populations recover quickly from harvesting pressure, and recognize environmental indicators that suggest developing opportunities or threats. This knowledge base serves as a strategic resource for the entire group, informing decisions about territorial expansion, seasonal migration routes, resource allocation, and crisis response planning. Your environmental assessments carry the weight of accumulated experience, providing reliability that's valuable for both routine planning and emergency decision-making. That area, you inform the group during a discussion about potential new foraging territory, becomes waterlogged during heavy rain periods, which creates excellent temporary beetle habitat, but also attracts ground hornbills and increases the risk of predator encounters during optimal foraging times. The productivity benefits are significant, but they come with security costs that need to be factored into access planning. Your ability to provide this kind of comprehensive risk-benefit analysis makes you invaluable for strategic planning that involves complex environmental factors and long-term consequences. The decisions informed by your knowledge tend to be more successful than those based solely on immediate observations, creating a track record that enhances your reputation and influence within the group. The environmental changes you've witnessed over your lifetime provide perspective on the dynamic nature of desert ecosystems that appear stable from shorter-term observations. You've seen areas transform from productive foraging territory to marginal habitat and back again, witnessed the establishment and abandonment of water sources, observed the cyclical nature of predator populations and territorial boundaries. This long-term perspective enables you to distinguish between temporary environmental fluctuations and genuine ecological changes that require adaptive responses. Your assessments help the group avoid overreacting to short-term variations, while remaining appropriately responsive to conditions that represent genuine shifts in environmental baseline conditions. Drought cycles. You explain during a planning session focused on resource management, follow patterns that span multiple seasons. Current conditions suggest we're in the early phases of an extended dry period, which means resource conservation strategies need to account for potentially 3 seasons of below normal precipitation, rather than the single-season shortfall that immediate conditions might suggest. Your contribution to group welfare has evolved beyond direct participation in survival activities to encompass the kind of institutional knowledge that improves collective decision-making and strategic planning. Your experience serves as a resource that benefits not just current group members, but future generations, who will inherit the territorial improvements, burrow systems, and resource management strategies that your knowledge has helped develop. The satisfaction that accompanies this role involves understanding that your contribution to something larger than individual survival extends beyond your own lifetime. The knowledge you've accumulated, the territory you've helped develop, and the survival strategies you've refined will continue benefiting the group long after your direct participation ends. You've helped others avoid the mistakes you made during your own learning process, providing guidance that enables more efficient skill development and reduces the costs associated with trial and error education. Your teaching has accelerated the learning curves of multiple generations, contributing to improved group survival rates and enhanced collective competence. Pattern recognition, you tell your current students, is the difference between reacting to events and anticipating them. Every environmental change follows patterns that become predictable once you've observed enough repetitions. Your job is learning to recognize those patterns quickly enough to use them for strategic advantage. The legacy you're building encompasses both practical knowledge and educational methodology, contributing to the group's survival capabilities in ways that will persist beyond your individual participation. You've become part of the institutional framework that enables community resilience and adaptation, contributing to continuity that spans generations and environmental changes. Spring returns with its familiar explosion of green abundance, and you find yourself settling into your preferred observation spot to watch another generation of juveniles discover that survival requires more than enthusiasm and good intentions. The seasonal cycle that once felt like a series of challenges to overcome now presents itself as a comfortable repetition of known patterns, predictable in their variety and reassuring in their continuity. The new crop of youngsters displays the same mixture of eager incompetence and creative disaster-making that you remember from previous years, previous decades, and your own increasingly distant youth. They approach basic survival tasks with the kind of confident optimism that suggests they haven't yet learned that the desert's beauty is matched only by its complete indifference to their continued existence. There's Flutter, whose name derives from her tendency to move in short, nervous bursts that accomplish very little but create a lot of motion. Her foraging technique involves enthusiastic digging, followed by confused examination of the holes she's created, as if beetles might spontaneously appear in response to sufficient excavation effort. Pip, not the Pip you knew years ago, but apparently names recycle with the same reliability as seasonal patterns, has developed a communication style that features maximum volume and minimum information content. His alarm calls convey genuine concern but provide approximately as much useful tactical intelligence as someone shouting, "Something happening somewhere" during a crisis. And there's Wobble, whose coordination challenges make your own juvenile clumsiness look like graceful athleticism by comparison. She approaches basic locomotion as if gravity were a personal opponent, with whom she's engaged in ongoing negotiations that rarely result in favorable terms. Watching their educational struggles provides a mixture of entertainment and nostalgia that you find surprisingly satisfying. The mistakes they make are fundamentally the same mistakes that every generation makes, variations on themes that seem to be hardwired into the meerkat developmental process. The specific details change, but the underlying patterns of confusion, overconfidence, and gradual competence acquisition remain remarkably consistent. Some things, you comment to Steady, who's been assigned to supervise this latest educational adventure, never change. Every generation thinks it's the first to discover that beetles require actual technique to catch, not just good intentions and enthusiastic digging. Steady nods with the patient expression of someone who's heard this observation before, probably multiple times, but who recognizes that elder commentary is part of the natural order and serves some purpose even when its immediate practical value isn't entirely clear. Your perspective on these cyclical patterns has evolved from the anxiety-driven focus of someone worried about immediate survival to the philosophical detachment of someone who understands that individual struggles occur within larger frameworks that persist regardless of particular outcomes. The juveniles will either learn or they won't, and the desert will continue regardless of their success or failure. This understanding brings a kind of peace that your younger self couldn't have accessed. The urgent concerns that once dominated your thinking, finding food, avoiding predators, mastering essential skills, now feel like manageable components of a larger system that operates according to principles you've learned to work with rather than against. The environmental constancy that surrounds these individual dramas provides perspective that makes both success and failure seem less dramatic than they once did. The landscape remains essentially unchanged from your earliest memories, offering the same opportunities and presenting the same challenges that have shaped meerkat existence for generations beyond counting. The acacia trees continue their slow growth, the termite mounds persist in their architectural ambitions, and the seasonal cycles maintain their reliable progression through abundance and scarcity. The beetles emerge and disappear according to schedules that have remained consistent across your entire lifetime, and the weather patterns follow rhythms that were established long before your birth and will continue long after your death. This continuity provides context that makes individual achievements and failures seem appropriately proportioned within the larger framework of ecological persistence. You've learned to appreciate your place in patterns that extend far beyond personal experience, contributing to cycles that encompass multiple generations and environmental changes. The understanding that boring was actually the point all along brings a satisfaction that would have been incomprehensible to your younger self. The dramatic struggles, urgent crises, and intense achievements that once defined success now seem less important than the quiet persistence that enabled you to witness multiple repetitions of the same fundamental patterns. You've achieved the kind of success that's measured not in spectacular accomplishments, but in sustained participation in the ongoing project of community survival. Your contribution has been reliability rather than brilliance, competence rather than heroism, and the accumulated wisdom that comes from surviving long enough to understand how individual efforts contribute to collective persistence. The desert remains indifferent and beautiful, offering the same harsh opportunities to each new generation, while maintaining the kind of environmental stability that makes learning possible and community survival achievable for those who develop appropriate skills and maintain appropriate humility about their place in the larger ecosystem. The transition from active participant to cherished memory happens with the same understated grace that has characterized most of your important life changes, quietly, without drama, and with the kind of natural inevitability that makes even significant endings feel like appropriate conclusions rather than unwelcome interruptions. Your final seasons involve gradually reduced participation in the physical activities that once defined your daily routine, replaced by increased time spent in the comfortable spots where observation and reflection require less energy than movement and action. The favorite termite mound that provided your preferred sentinel position becomes a place for contemplation rather than surveillance, offering views of territory that's become as familiar as your own breathing patterns. The group's relationship with you evolves into the kind of gentle care that recognizes both your continued value and your changing needs. Your opinions are still sought for important decisions, but the expectation that you'll participate directly in their implementation has been quietly adjusted to accommodate your preference for advisory roles rather than active leadership. Younger members of the group make regular visits to share news, seek advice, or simply spend time in the presence of someone who represents continuity and accumulated wisdom. These interactions provide satisfaction without requiring the energy that more demanding social activities would involve, offering connection that respects your need for rest while acknowledging your continued importance to community welfare. The environmental integration that accompanies this final phase feels natural rather than melancholy. Your intimate familiarity with the landscape has created a relationship that seems less like temporary residence and more like permanent belonging. The desert that once challenged your survival now embraces your presence with the kind of acceptance that comes from long association and mutual accommodation. The burrow system that you helped design and excavate over the years represents perhaps your most lasting contribution to group welfare. Architectural improvements that will benefit future generations long after your direct participation ends. The tunnels, chambers, and emergency exits that your labor helped create provide security and comfort that extends your contribution to community survival beyond your individual lifetime. Your knowledge, dispersed through years of teaching and mentorship, has become part of the group's institutional wisdom. The survival strategies you refined, the environmental insights you developed, and the educational techniques you perfected continue functioning as resources that improve collective competence and adaptation capabilities. The seasonal cycle continues around you with reassuring predictability. Spring brings its familiar abundance and new generation of confused juveniles. Summer provides its customary challenges and opportunities for skill development. Autumn offers its lessons in resource management and preparation. Winter tests the adequacy of planning and the strength of community cooperation. In the end, the most boring life turned out to be the most remarkable achievement of all, not because it featured dramatic events or exceptional accomplishments, but because it demonstrated the profound success that comes from sustained competence, reliable contribution to community welfare, and the kind of patient persistence that enables not just individual survival, but collective prosperity. The desert continues its ancient patterns. New meerkats are born into the ongoing project of learning to live in harmony with an environment that's both beautiful and deadly, and the cycle begins again with the same mixture of hope, determination, and the gradual understanding that unremarkable excellence represents the highest achievement available to creatures whose primary goal is simply continuing to exist in a world that has other plans for them. Your legacy lives on in the improved burrows, the refined survival strategies, the educated younger generation, and the accumulated wisdom that makes community survival more likely for those who come after. The boring life well lived becomes, in retrospect, the most extraordinary accomplishment possible. In the months following the Great Draining, as humanity struggles to adapt to their new reality, the Earth itself begins to respond to the fundamental change in its mass distribution. The removal of 1.4 billion cubic kilometers of water, a mass so vast it defies easy comprehension, has created consequences that extend far beyond the obvious disappearance of seas and rivers. The planet, like a spinning figure skater who suddenly extends their arms, must find a new balance. The first sign comes in the form of time itself. Days, those fundamental units by which we've measured our existence since the dawn of civilization, begin to shorten. Not dramatically. We're talking about minutes, not hours, but enough that atomic clocks around the world start registering the change. The Earth, relieved of water's tremendous weight, spins slightly faster on its axis, like a pottery wheel with some of its clay removed. Scientists at observatories worldwide scramble to understand what they're seeing. Dr. Sarah Chen, at the International Earth Rotation Service, stares at her instruments with a mixture of fascination and concern. We're measuring a consistent reduction in the length of a day, she explains to her colleague over a cup of carefully rationed coffee. They'll last, as shipping lanes no longer exist. About 2.3 minutes shorter every 24-hour period. It doesn't sound like much, but the implications are staggering. The mathematics are elegant in their simplicity and terrifying in their scope. The Earth's moment of inertia, the resistance to changes in rotation, has decreased significantly with the removal of the ocean's mass. Conservation of angular momentum demands that as the moment of inertia decreases, rotational speed must increase. It's basic physics, the kind taught in freshman mechanics courses, but applied to an entire planet. What this means for the survivors is initially subtle but increasingly noticeable. Sunrise comes slightly earlier each day, not because of seasonal changes, but because the Earth itself is turning faster. Navigation systems that rely on celestial positioning require constant recalibration. The carefully synchronized networks that once connected the world through satellite communications begin experiencing timing errors that compound with each passing day. But the faster rotation is just the beginning. The Moon, Earth's faithful companion for billions of years, continues its ancient dance around our planet, but now it's dancing with a partner whose rhythm has changed. The gravitational relationship between Earth and Moon, once perfectly balanced to affect primarily water in the form of tides, now exerts its influence on different materials. Tidal forces, those gentle but inexorable pulls that once raised and lowered ocean levels twice daily, now work upon the land itself. The solid Earth, which seems so permanent and immovable, actually flexes and flows on geological timescales. What once was a minor effect, masked by the dramatic movement of water, now becomes visible in the planet's new, drier state. Seismologists notice it first. Subtle variations in the timing and intensity of the Earth's natural vibrations. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez at the Global Seismic Monitoring Network observes patterns he's never seen before. The planet is literally being squeezed and stretched by lunar gravity. He reports to the Emergency Scientific Council that has formed to track these changes. Without the oceans to absorb and distribute these tidal forces, the solid Earth itself is experiencing greater stress. The effects are most noticeable in areas that were once coastal regions. Former beaches and continental shelves, now exposed to the atmosphere for the first time in millions of years, rise and fall by centimeters twice daily. It's an eerie sight. Solid ground that seems to breathe with the rhythm of celestial mechanics. A slow inhalation and exhalation that follows the moon's position in the sky. The Earth's magnetic field, that invisible shield that protects us from cosmic radiation and guides migrating animals across vast distances, also begins to show signs of change. The field is generated by the movement of molten iron in the planet's outer core, and this system is sensitive to changes in the planet's rotation and mass distribution. Dr. Amara Okafor, monitoring magnetic field fluctuations from a research station in former Ghana, notes subtle but consistent variations in field strength and orientation. The magnetic field isn't collapsing or reversing, she explains, but it's definitely adjusting to our planet's new configuration. We're seeing regional variations that we've never recorded before, and the overall field strength has increased by approximately 2%, likely due to the faster rotation affecting the dynamo process in the core. For the few remaining animals, this magnetic shift is profoundly disorienting. Birds that once navigated by magnetic cues find themselves confused, their internal compasses pointing to locations that no longer align with their ancestral migration routes. The lucky ones adapt, many don't. The magnetic map that life on Earth has relied upon for millions of years has been redrawn overnight. Perhaps most dramatically, the planet's plate tectonics, the slow dance of continents that has shaped Earth's surface for billions of years, begins to respond to the new stress patterns created by the missing oceans. The weight of water had pressed down on oceanic plates, while the buoyancy provided by water had partially supported continental margins. With this system gone, the tectonic balance shifts. Earthquakes, once primarily concentrated along predictable fault lines at plate boundaries, begin occurring in new patterns. The former ocean floors, no longer weighted down by kilometers of water, begin to rise slightly, a process called isostatic rebound. It's the same phenomenon that causes land to rise after ice sheets melt, but happening on a global scale and at an accelerated pace. Dr. James Wheeler, studying seismic activity from a former university now surrounded by the vast expanse of what was once the Atlantic Ocean floor, documents this unprecedented geological activity. We're seeing earthquake swarms in areas that have been seismically quiet for thousands of years, he reports. The former deep ocean basins are experiencing uplift as they adjust to the absence of water pressure. Meanwhile, some continental areas that were once at sea level are subsiding slightly as the tectonic balance shifts. The earthquakes aren't catastrophic. They're typically magnitude 3 to 5 events, more like the planet adjusting its posture than experiencing trauma. But they're constant, a low rumble of geological readjustment that continues day and night. Survivors living in areas that were once coastal describe it as feeling like the Earth itself is stretching and settling, finding its new shape after a fundamental change. The mid-ocean ridges, those underwater mountain ranges where new oceanic crust was born from volcanic activity, now stand exposed to the atmosphere. Without the moderating influence of water, the volcanic activity at these sites becomes more erratic. Some areas experience increased activity as the reduced pressure allows magma to reach the surface more easily. Others become dormant as the complex circulation systems that once fed them are disrupted. Mount Kilimanjaro, once a snow-capped peak rising from the East African plateau, now overlooks a landscape transformed beyond recognition. The Rift Valley, partially filled with what were once lakes and inland seas, stretches empty and echoing toward horizons that were once underwater. The geological forces that created this valley continue their work, but in a world so fundamentally altered that their effects manifest in entirely new ways. These planetary changes, invisible to casual observation but profound in their implications, represent Earth's attempt to find a new equilibrium. It's a process that will take decades to complete, as the planet slowly adjusts to its lighter, faster, magnetically different configuration. The Earth is learning to be itself again, but as a fundamentally different version of itself, one that humanity, in their desperate ingenuity, has accidentally created. The Earth's climate system, evolved over billions of years to work in harmony with vast oceans, suddenly finds itself operating without its primary regulatory mechanism. It's like trying to conduct an orchestra after removing all the string instruments. The remaining elements must find a new way to work together, creating harmonies and rhythms that have never existed before. The first months are characterized by what climatologists reluctantly term aggressive instability. Temperature swings that would have been moderated by the thermal mass of the oceans now occur with shocking rapidity, intensity. Former coastal areas, once blessed with the temperate influence of nearby seas, experience temperature variations that would have been unimaginable in the water world. Dr. Elena Vasquez, monitoring weather patterns from a research station established on what was once the floor of the Mediterranean Sea, documents these extreme fluctuations with a mixture of scientific fascination and personal concern. During a single week in what was once autumn, her instruments record temperatures ranging from 15 degrees at dawn to 55 degrees in the afternoon. The thermal mass that once buffered these variations is simply gone, she explains in her daily reports to the remnant scientific community. The land heats and cools dramatically because there's no longer any oceanic influence to moderate the temperature swings. The absence of water vapor from oceanic evaporation creates atmospheric conditions unlike anything in Earth's recorded climate history. Humidity levels drop to desert-like levels, even in regions that were once temperate rainforests. The Amazon basin, stripped of its river systems, and the Atlantic moisture source that once fed its legendary rainfall, transforms into something resembling the surface of Mars more than a terrestrial ecosystem. But perhaps the most visually dramatic changes occur in the planet's wind patterns. The Coriolis effect, that fundamental force that shapes weather systems through Earth's rotation, now acts upon an entirely different landscape. Without the thermal gradients created by warm tropical oceans and cooler polar seas, the familiar pattern of trade winds, westerlies, and polar easterlies completely breaks down. New wind patterns emerge, driven by the vast temperature differentials between the sun-baked former ocean floors and the elevated continents. During the day, massive thermal currents rise from the deepest basins, areas that were once 4 kilometers below sea level and now form the planet's most extreme heat sinks. These columns of superheated air create convection patterns that dwarf any weather system Earth has ever experienced. Dr. Michael Zhang, tracking atmospheric dynamics from a station positioned on the former continental shelf of Asia, describes winds unlike anything in meteorological record. We're measuring sustained winds of 8,120 kilometers per hour, emerging from the deep basins during peak heating hours, he reports. These aren't storms in any traditional sense. They're massive thermal engines driven by temperature gradients that simply couldn't exist when the oceans moderated these variations. The dust storms that result from these wind patterns are spectacular and terrifying in equal measure. The dried salt flats that were once ocean floors contain billions of tons of mineral deposits, salt, calcium carbonate, and other materials left behind when the water disappeared. These substances, never meant to be exposed to atmospheric forces, are lifted into the air by the extreme winds and carried across continents. Satellite imagery, maintained by the few remaining space agencies, shows dust plumes that stretch across entire former ocean basins. What was once the Atlantic becomes a massive dust highway, carrying minerals from the American continental shelf to the European highlands. The Pacific Basin generates dust storms so large they're visible from the International Space Station, which continues its orbit around this transformed world. Operated by a skeleton crew who provide crucial observational data, these dust storms carry more than just minerals. They transport the chemical signature of the vanished oceans across the planet. Former marine sediments, rich in nutrients that once supported oceanic ecosystems, now fertilize terrestrial environments in ways that are both beneficial and overwhelming. Some areas experience sudden explosive plant growth as ocean floor nutrients become available to land-based vegetation. Others are sterilized by salt concentrations that no terrestrial life can tolerate. The seasonal patterns that have governed Earth's climate for millions of years completely reorganize themselves. Without the thermal lag provided by oceanic heat capacity, seasons become more extreme and immediate. The sun's energy, once absorbed and gradually released by vast bodies of water, now hits land directly and is radiated back to space with minimal delay. Dr. Rachel Kim, studying these new seasonal patterns from a research outpost in what was once Korea, documents changes that challenge fundamental assumptions about Earth's climate. We're seeing winter temperatures that drop 40 degrees below anything previously recorded for these latitudes, she notes, followed by summers that exceed historical records by similar margins. The moderating influence of water was apparently much more critical to seasonal stability than we ever realized. But nature, as always, proves remarkably adaptive. After approximately 18 months of chaotic weather patterns, something unexpected begins to happen. The Earth starts finding its new rhythm. The initial wild swings in temperature and wind gradually settle into new patterns that, while completely different from oceanic Earth, begin to show their own consistency and predictability. The new climate system organizes itself around thermal cycles driven by the massive elevation differences now present on the planet's surface. The deepest basins become permanent, low-pressure systems during daylight hours, drawing air down from the elevated continents in patterns that create their own weather systems. At night, the process reverses, creating complex circulation patterns that begin to show seasonal consistency. Precipitation, scarce during the initial chaos, begins to follow new patterns as well. The extreme thermal differences between basins and highlands create powerful convection systems that draw moisture from the remaining groundwater and the few surviving water bodies. Rainfall, when it occurs, is often intense and localized, creating desert oasis effects around areas where conditions align to support condensation. Dr. Vasquez, continuing her observations from the Mediterranean basin, notes the emergence of these new patterns with cautious optimism. We're beginning to see consistent daily weather cycles, she reports after 2 years of monitoring. It's nothing like the old climate system, but it's becoming predictable in its own way. The Earth is learning to regulate itself differently, but it is learning. The dust storms, initially chaotic and destructive, begin to follow seasonal patterns as well. The thermal cycles that drive them become more regular, creating dust seasons that, while still extreme by historical standards, at least follow patterns that survivors can predict and prepare for. Some regions develop dust storm seasons that last for months but occur at predictable times, allowing human settlements to prepare for these periods of atmospheric violence. Perhaps most remarkably, the planet begins to develop its own beauty in these new patterns. Sunsets, filtered through dust from former ocean floors, create colors that no human has ever seen. Spectacular oranges and purples painted with minerals that once lay hidden beneath kilometers of water. The aurora borealis, affected by the changed magnetic field, displays new patterns and intensities that create nighttime light shows of unprecedented beauty. The new wind patterns, while initially destructive, begin to create their own landscapes. Wind-carved formations emerge in the former ocean basins, sculpted by the constant movement of air through these vast empty spaces. Some areas develop features resembling the slot canyons of the American Southwest, carved not by water but by wind carrying abrasive particles from dried seafloors. After 3 years of adaptation, the Earth's climate system achieves something resembling stability. Not the gentle, moderated stability of the oceanic world, but a more dramatic, extreme stability that reflects the planet's new configuration. Seasons become more intense but more predictable. Weather patterns, while harsh, follow cycles that careful observers can learn to anticipate. This new equilibrium is characterized by extremes: extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme wind, extreme stillness, but extremes that follow their own rules and rhythms. The Earth has found its new rhythm, a tempo faster and more dramatic than its oceanic predecessor, but a rhythm nonetheless. It's a harsher world, but one that, given enough time and adaptation, might be livable for those few humans, clever and resilient enough to learn its new rules. The exposure of Earth's ocean floors represents the most significant scientific opportunity in human history. A chance to study in detail the 71% of our planet's surface that had remained largely mysterious throughout our species' existence. As the initial shock of the transformation subsides and the few remaining scientific institutions begin to organize systematic exploration of the revealed seabeds, discoveries emerge that revolutionize our understanding of Earth, life, and the cosmic forces that shaped our world. The first major revelation comes from the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, that underwater mountain range that had been the birthplace of oceanic crust for millions of years. Dr. Patricia Reeves, leading one of the first systematic geological surveys of the exposed ridge system, discovers that the Earth's ocean floors contain a geological record far more detailed and extensive than anything previously accessible. What we're seeing here, Dr. Reeves explains, standing on volcanic formations that were creating new seafloor just months earlier, is essentially Earth's autobiography written in stone. Every layer, every mineral deposit, every volcanic formation tells us something about conditions that existed when this crust was formed. We have access to geological records spanning back 200 million years, laid out like an open book across thousands of kilometers. The exposed ocean floors reveal the complete history of plate tectonics in unprecedented detail. The symmetrical patterns of magnetic striping on either side of mid-ocean ridges, previously known only through limited deep-sea sampling, now stretch visibly across vast landscapes. Scientists can walk along these formations and literally observe the process by which continents have moved over geological time, reading the magnetic signature of Earth's ancient magnetic field reversals preserved in the rock. Perhaps most dramatically, the ocean floors reveal evidence of asteroid impacts that had been completely unknown. Dr. Mohammed Hassan, surveying what was once the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, discovers impact craters of immense size that had been hidden beneath kilometers of water and sediment. This crater structure, Dr. Hassan reports, standing at the rim of a formation nearly 150 kilometers in diameter, represents an impact event that would have been absolutely catastrophic for life on Earth. Based on the surrounding rock formations and sediment layers, we estimate this impact occurred approximately 450 million years ago, during the Ordovician period. This was likely responsible for one of the major extinction events we see in the fossil record, but until now, we had no idea where the impact occurred. The archaeological discoveries prove equally revolutionary. The ocean floors contain evidence of human activity dating back much further than previously known. Former coastlines, now exposed hundreds of meters below their previous water levels, reveal archaeological sites that had been submerged as sea levels rose during the end of the last ice age. Dr. Sarah Chen, now leading archaeological surveys in addition to her work monitoring Earth's rotation changes, makes discoveries that rewrite human history. We're finding evidence of sophisticated settlements along what were ancient coastlines, she reports from a site that was once 200 meters underwater off the coast of former Japan. These sites date to at least 15,000 years ago, suggesting that early human civilizations were far more advanced and widespread than we previously understood. Many of our assumptions about early human development were limited by the fact that the most advanced settlements were underwater. Entire cities, submerged by rising seas thousands of years ago, now stand exposed to study. The architectural sophistication of these underwater civilizations challenges assumptions about the technological capabilities of ancient peoples. Some structures show engineering principles that weren't thought to have been developed until much later in human history. The biological discoveries prove equally significant, though also heartbreaking. The few remaining marine biologists, working with equipment salvaged from former oceanographic institutions, race to study and preserve what they can from the vast graveyards of sea life now exposed to the atmosphere. Dr. James Morrison, formerly of the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, leads efforts to study the remains of deep-sea ecosystems that had never been observed in their natural state. What we're finding in the deepest areas challenges everything we thought we knew about life in extreme environments, he reports. The biodiversity in these deep-sea communities was extraordinary. We're identifying new species in almost every sample we collect. Unfortunately, we're studying extinction in real time. The hydrothermal vent systems, those underwater oases that supported unique ecosystems in the deepest parts of the oceans, now stand exposed as alien landscapes of mineral formations and exotic chemistry. The organisms that thrived in these environments, adapted to live in conditions of extreme temperature and pressure without sunlight, represent evolutionary pathways that existed nowhere else on Earth. These ecosystems, Dr. Morrison explains, developed independently from all other life on Earth. They were powered by chemical energy rather than solar energy, representing a completely different approach to life that might be similar to what we could find on other planets. By studying them, even in their current dead state, we're learning about the fundamental possibilities for life in the universe. The climate science discoveries prove particularly crucial for understanding Earth's future in its new configuration. The ocean floors reveal evidence of past climate changes that help scientists understand how planetary climate systems respond to extreme modifications. Dr. Elena Vasquez, expanding her research beyond current weather monitoring to study paleoclimate evidence exposed on the former seafloors, makes discoveries that provide hope for long-term human survival. We're finding evidence that Earth's climate has undergone dramatic reorganizations before, she reports. While never on this scale, the geological record shows that climate systems can find new stable configurations after major disruptions. The question is whether these new configurations will be compatible with human life. The removal of the oceans also provides unprecedented opportunities to study the role of water in planetary systems. Scientists can now observe directly how the absence of oceanic thermal regulation affects everything from atmospheric circulation to magnetic field generation to tectonic activity. Dr. Michael Zhang, now coordinating global atmospheric monitoring efforts, synthesizes these discoveries into new theories about planetary climate systems. What we're learning is that water doesn't just moderate climate. It fundamentally shapes the basic physics of how planets work, he explains. The thermal capacity, the chemical buffering, the physical mass distribution. Water's role in planetary systems is far more fundamental than we ever realized. These insights prove valuable not just for understanding Earth, but for evaluating the habitability of other planets. The natural experiment created by Earth's ocean disappearance provides data about planetary physics that would have been impossible to obtain any other way. Perhaps most importantly, the scientific discoveries reveal the true scope of what has been lost. The ocean floors contain evidence of evolutionary processes, chemical cycles, and physical systems that had been operating for billions of years. The complexity and interconnectedness of oceanic systems, revealed now only in their absence, demonstrates that the Earth's biosphere was far more intricate and sophisticated than even the most advanced scientific models had predicted. Dr. Reeves, reflecting on months of discoveries across the exposed ocean floors, summarizes the bittersweet nature of these revelations. We're learning more about our planet in these few years than we learned in the previous century of oceanographic research. But every discovery also shows us something else we've lost forever. It's like being given access to the most incredible library in the universe, but only because the library is burning down around us. The scientific discoveries emerging from the revealed ocean floors represent both humanity's greatest triumph of knowledge and its most profound loss. The data being collected will inform human understanding for generations, providing insights into planetary systems, evolutionary processes, and the fundamental nature of life itself. But each discovery also serves as a reminder of the incredible complexity and beauty of the world that humanity, in its desperation to survive, has irreversibly transformed. The humbling realization that emerges from all these discoveries is simple but profound. Water's importance to planetary systems extends far beyond what even the most sophisticated models had predicted. The ocean wasn't just Earth's largest feature. It was the foundation upon which every other system on the planet depended. Its removal hasn't just changed the world, it has revealed that the world humanity thought they understood was actually far more complex, interconnected, and beautiful than they had ever imagined. And now, it's gone forever, leaving behind only the memory of its complexity preserved in rock, bone, and the few remaining records of what once was the blue planet Earth. Standing on what was once the floor of the Pacific Ocean, 3 kilometers below where waves had rolled for millions of years, the survivors of humanity's greatest experiment find themselves reading a story written in sediment and stone. Earth's autobiography, laid bare for the first time in the planet's 4.5 billion year history. The exposed ocean floors stretch endlessly in all directions, a landscape more alien than the surface of Mars, yet more familiar than any place humans have ever seen. This is home. After all, not home as we've known it, but home as it truly is beneath the blue veil that has hidden 3/4 of our planet's surface since complex life began. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now months into her survey of what was once the Mediterranean Sea, stands beside sediment layers that tell stories spanning geological ages. Each stripe in the rock face represents thousands of years of accumulated history, microscopic shells of ancient creatures, volcanic ash from eruptions that shook continents, dust from impacts that reset the evolutionary clock, and the gradual chemical signatures of ice ages, warm periods, and the countless subtle changes that have shaped Earth's climate over deep time. This, she says, running her hand along a particularly distinct layer of red sediment, is the Cretaceous-Paleogene boundary. 66 million years ago, right here, the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs left its signature in elevated iridium levels. We're literally touching the moment when one age ended and another began. The scale of time made visible is almost incomprehensible to minds, evolved to think in terms of days, seasons, and human lifespans. Yet here it is, spread across landscapes that dwarf entire countries, millions of millennia of Earth's patient record-keeping, preserved in layers of mud that accumulated grain by grain as life above continued its endless experiments in survival and adaptation. The deepest ocean trenches, now revealed as vast canyons cutting through the planet's exposed skin, tell stories of tectonic violence and gradual healing. The Mariana Trench, once hidden beneath 11 kilometers of water, now stands as Earth's most dramatic scar, a wound in the planet's surface that reveals the ongoing collision between oceanic and continental plates that has shaped the Pacific Basin for tens of millions of years. Walking along the rim of this canyon, former marine geologist Dr. James Morrison reflects on the stories written in its walls. Every layer here represents a conversation between the solid Earth and the ocean that once covered it, he explains. The chemical signatures tell us about ancient temperatures, pH levels, oxygen concentrations, an entire atmospheric and oceanic history preserved in rock. The sediment cores that oceanographers once extracted laboriously from the deep-sea floor, precious samples that provided tiny windows into Earth's past, now extend as visible striations across entire continents. What once required expensive research vessels and sophisticated drilling equipment to study can now be examined by anyone willing to walk across the revealed landscapes of deep time. But perhaps the most profound revelations come not from the grand geological formations, but from the intimate details preserved in the finest sediments. Microscopic fossils of creatures that lived and died in ancient seas are now scattered across the surface, like stars in a terrestrial galaxy. Each grain of sand contains the remains of organisms that participated in evolutionary experiments, chemical cycles, and ecological relationships that we're only beginning to understand. Dr. Sarah Chen, expanding her archaeological work to include paleontological surveys, discovers that the diversity of life in Earth's ancient oceans far exceeded anything previously imagined. The fossil record we can access now represents billions of individual lives lived across hundreds of millions of years, she reports. Every handful of sediment contains the remains of creatures that were born, lived, reproduced, and died in oceans that existed before continents had formed their current shapes. The chemical signatures preserved in these sediments tell stories of Earth's atmosphere and climate across deep time. Periods of high carbon dioxide levels, ice ages that locked vast quantities of water in polar ice caps, warm periods when tropical conditions extended nearly to the poles, all recorded in the chemical composition of sediments that accumulated grain by grain on ancient sea floors. These records reveal that Earth's climate has been far more variable throughout its history than modern humans have experienced. The relatively stable climate of the past 10 years, during which human civilization developed, appears in the geological record as an unusually calm period in an otherwise dynamic climate system. What we're seeing, explains Dr. Michael Zhang, now studying paleoclimate records exposed on the former ocean floors, is that dramatic climate change is actually normal for Earth. The stable conditions that allowed human civilization to develop were an exception, not the rule. Our planet is naturally dynamic, constantly adjusting and readjusting its systems in response to changes in solar output, atmospheric composition, and the arrangement of continents. The exposed ocean floors also reveal the signature of mass extinction events, those rare but catastrophic periods when Earth's biosphere underwent fundamental reorganization. The fossil record shows not just the famous extinction that ended the dinosaurs, but dozens of lesser-known events that cleared ecological niches and allowed new forms of life to evolve. Each extinction event is written in the sediments as a sudden change in the types of fossils preserved, often accompanied by unusual chemical signatures that suggest dramatic environmental changes. Some extinctions appear to have been caused by asteroid impacts, others by massive volcanic eruptions, and still others by more gradual changes in ocean chemistry or atmospheric composition. The message from deep time is clear, Dr. Morrison reflects, studying layers that record the Permian extinction, the most severe crisis life on Earth has ever faced. Extinction isn't an aberration, it's part of the way Earth's biosphere maintains itself over geological timescales. Species, ecosystems, entire forms of life arise, flourish, and disappear as conditions change. What we're witnessing now with the disappearance of oceanic life is tragic from our perspective, but from the planet's perspective, it's just another chapter in an ongoing story. The sediment layers also preserve records of Earth's magnetic field reversals, those mysterious periods when the planet's magnetic poles switched positions. These events, occurring roughly every few 100,000 years, are recorded in the magnetic orientation of iron particles in the sediments. The patterns revealed across the exposed ocean floors show that magnetic reversals have been a regular feature of Earth's behavior for at least the past 200 million years. Perhaps most humbling of all, the exposed ocean floors reveal just how brief human presence has been in Earth's history. The thin layer of sediment that contains evidence of human activity, increased CO2 levels, plastics, radioactive isotopes from nuclear testing, represents an infinitesimally small portion of the geological record. Humanity's entire existence, from the first stone tools to the draining of the oceans, appears as barely detectable changes in the most recent sediment layers. From the perspective of deep time, Dr. Vasquez observes, human civilization is like a single breath in a lifetime. We've had enormous impact on the surface conditions of the planet, but the Earth has experienced changes far more dramatic than anything we've caused, and it has always found ways to continue, to adapt, to create new forms of beauty and complexity. The empty ocean floors serve as a meditation on impermanence and change. The fossilized remains of ancient reefs show that even the most stable and long-lasting ecosystems eventually give way to new forms of organization. Mountain ranges that once towered above sea level are now revealed as worn-down stubs on the ocean floor, their former grandeur recorded only in the sediments eroded from their peaks. Yet the message isn't one of nihilism or meaninglessness. Instead, the geological record reveals Earth as an endlessly creative planet, constantly experimenting with new forms of organization, new ways of cycling elements and energy, new expressions of complexity and beauty. The draining of the oceans represents not the end of Earth's story, but another chapter in an ongoing narrative of change, adaptation, and renewal. Standing on sediments that preserve the history of life itself, the few remaining humans find themselves part of this vast story, not its conclusion, but participants in its continuing unfoldment. The messages from the deep speak of resilience, creativity, and the endless capacity of matter and energy to organize themselves into new forms of beauty and complexity. The ocean floors, empty of their former life but rich with memory, remind us that everything passes, but also that everything is part of something larger, more enduring, and ultimately more magnificent than any individual moment or manifestation can contain. In the end, as the last humans survey the transformed world they have created, the true meaning of water reveals itself not in its absence, but in the sudden, overwhelming understanding of what its presence had made possible. Water, it turns out, was never just a substance. It was the medium through which Earth became alive, the connection between all things, the patient architect of everything we had ever known or loved. Dr. Patricia Reeves, standing at the edge of what was once the Atlantic Ocean, contemplates the vast expanse of revealed seafloor stretching toward a horizon that was once Europe. The distance seems impossible, thousands of kilometers of exposed Earth where waves had rolled just months before. But it's not the physical distance that staggers her. It's the conceptual distance between the world that was and the world that is. We spent our entire species' history thinking of water as separate from us. She reflects in her final report to the remnant scientific community. We talked about water as a resource, as something we used, as an environment distinct from the terrestrial world we inhabited. What we never understood was that water wasn't just supporting life. It was the medium through which life expressed itself as a planetary phenomenon. The ocean had been Earth's circulatory system, moving heat from equator to poles, moderating temperatures, and creating the stable climate zones that allowed different forms of life to specialize in different conditions while remaining connected through global systems of current and weather. Without it, the planet had become not just hotter and colder, but fundamentally disconnected, a collection of isolated terrestrial islands in a sea of empty air. Water had been the planet's memory system, dissolving minerals from rocks, carrying them across continents, and depositing them in patterns that recorded Earth's chemical and biological history. The ocean floors that now lay exposed contained the accumulated memory of billions of years, but without water to continue the processes of dissolution, transport, and deposition, Earth's memory system had stopped functioning. Perhaps most profoundly, water had been life's original home and its constant companion. Every cell in every living thing was primarily water, and the chemical processes that sustained life were water-based reactions. Life hadn't adapted to use water. Life had evolved as a manifestation of water's chemical possibilities. The disappearance of the oceans hadn't just eliminated marine ecosystems. It had severed the connection between terrestrial life and its fundamental nature. Dr. James Morrison, now in his final month studying the remains of deep-sea ecosystems, makes a discovery that encapsulates water's true meaning. In a preserved hydrothermal vent field, he finds evidence that these underwater oases had been recreating, in miniature, the same chemical processes that might have given rise to life itself billions of years ago. These vent systems weren't just unusual ecosystems, he reports. They were demonstrations of water's creative potential, laboratories where the chemical experimentation that produced life was still ongoing. Every vent field was like a window into the early Earth, showing us that the chemistry of life and the chemistry of water were essentially the same thing. The survivors' attempts to create closed-loop water systems in their settlements had revealed just how complex water's planetary role had been. It wasn't enough to recycle the water they had. The absence of the vast oceanic system meant that weather patterns, soil chemistry, and atmospheric composition were all slowly changing in ways that made their carefully designed systems increasingly unstable. Water had been the great connector, linking mountain glaciers to tropical seas, desert aquifers to polar ice caps, and the moisture in forest soils to the clouds that carried rain across continents. This planetary water cycle had created a single, integrated system that maintained the conditions necessary for life across Earth's diverse landscapes. Dr. Elena Vasquez, reflecting on her years of studying both the chaotic early climate and the new patterns that eventually emerged, realizes that water had been Earth's thermostat, its chemical buffer, and its biological transport system all at once. We thought of the ocean as a feature of the planet, she observes, but the planet as we knew it was actually a feature of the ocean. The psychological impact of water's absence proves as profound as its physical effects. Humans, it turns out, had evolved not just in the presence of water, but in relationship with it. The sound of waves, the play of light on water surfaces, the feeling of moisture in the air, these weren't just pleasant experiences, but fundamental inputs that shaped human consciousness and well-being. The few children born in the post-oceanic world developed differently from their water world ancestors. Without the rhythmic sound of tides, the visual complexity of water in motion, or the sensory richness of humid environments, Their neurological development follows new patterns. They adapt to the transformed world more easily than adults, but they also seem to lack something ineffable, a connection to natural rhythms that water had provided for millions of years of human evolution. Water wasn't just our environment, reflects Dr. Sarah Chen, observing these differences in child development. It was our teacher. The patterns of flow, the cycles of evaporation and precipitation, the way water finds its level and carves new paths. These were the metaphors that shaped human thinking about change, persistence, and adaptation. Without them, we're having to learn entirely new ways of understanding our place in natural systems. The few remaining bodies of fresh water, carefully maintained aquifers and artificial reservoirs, become places of pilgrimage for the survivors. These small oases provide not just physical sustenance, but psychological connection to the world they had lost. People travel great distances just to sit beside still water, to watch its surface reflect the sky, to remember what it felt like to live on a planet where water was abundant and ever-present. Yet perhaps the most profound realization comes not from studying what water had done, but from understanding what water had represented. In its fluidity, its persistence, its ability to take any shape while maintaining its essential nature, water had been Earth's demonstration of how to be both constant and changeable, both yielding and powerful, both individual and universal. Water had shown life how to adapt without losing identity, how to flow around obstacles while maintaining direction, how to be both part of something larger and irreducibly unique. Every river, every raindrop, every ocean wave had been both completely itself and completely connected to every other expression of water on the planet. The great tragedy of the ocean's disappearance wasn't just the loss of specific ecosystems or climate patterns, but the loss of this living demonstration of interconnectedness. The water world had been a planet-sized example of how individual elements could maintain their distinctness, while participating in larger patterns of flow, cycle, and renewal. We thought we were solving a resource problem, Dr. Reeves concludes in her final reflection on the Great Draining. What we actually did was break the physical demonstration of how connection and individuality could coexist. Water showed us every day that you could be yourself, while also being part of something larger. Without it, we're having to learn that lesson all over again, but this time without the teacher. As the surviving humans face their uncertain future in the transformed world, they carry with them a new understanding of what they had possessed when the Earth was still blue. Water hadn't just been the foundation of life. It had been life's ongoing demonstration of its own deepest principles. In its absence, they must learn to embody those principles themselves. The persistence that flows around obstacles, the adaptability that maintains identity through constant change, and the recognition that individual survival is inseparable from the health of larger systems. The empty ocean floors stretch endlessly under alien skies, but in the minds of those who remember the blue planet, water continues its eternal demonstration of how to be both drop and ocean, wave and sea, individual and universal, separate and connected, temporary and eternal. The physical water may be gone, but its deepest teaching, that all life flows together in patterns larger and more beautiful than any individual part can comprehend, remains as humanity's most precious inheritance from the world they transformed forever. And in that understanding, perhaps, lies the possibility that wisdom can emerge even from the greatest losses, and that love for what was lost can become the foundation for whatever new forms of beauty may yet emerge from the transformed Earth. And so, after wandering through this impossible landscape of empty ocean basins and transformed continents, after witnessing the collapse of familiar systems and the emergence of alien new patterns, after following the last humans as they struggle to survive in a world they had inadvertently broken, we find ourselves ready to return home. Home to the blue marble spinning in space. Home to the world where tides still rise and fall. Where rain still falls from clouds heavy with oceanic moisture. Where the sound of waves against shorelines continues its ancient rhythm that has soothed countless generations before us. The return journey begins gently, like waking from a vivid dream. The harsh landscapes we've explored, those endless expanses of dried salt flats that were once the Atlantic, the towering walls of the Mariana Trench exposed to alien skies, the dust storms carrying the mineral memories of vanished seas, begin to shimmer and fade like mirages in the desert heat. The transformed Earth, with its faster rotation and chaotic weather patterns, its struggling survivors and empty ocean basins, slowly dissolves back into the realm of imagination from which it came. As our consciousness returns from this thought experiment, We find ourselves back in a world where the Pacific Ocean still stretches vast and blue, from California to Japan, where the Atlantic still carries warm Gulf Stream waters toward European shores, where the Indian Ocean still moderates the monsoons that bring life-giving rain to billions of people. We return to a world where water still covers 71% of Earth's surface, where marine ecosystems still teem with life we're only beginning to understand, where the great oceanic currents still regulate our planet's climate with the patience of geological time. Listen. Can you hear it? That sound, underneath all other sounds. The distant whisper of waves meeting shore, the gentle percussion of water returning to water, the rhythm that connects every beach on Earth to every other beach through the planetary embrace of oceanic circulation. It's a sound so constant, so fundamental, that we often forget it's there. But it is there, always there. The planet's own heartbeat made audible in the eternal conversation between water and land. The sound of waves is perhaps Earth's most universal music, a symphony that has played without interruption for billions of years, long before there were ears to hear it, and one that will continue long after the last listener has gone. Each wave that breaks on any shore is connected to every other wave, part of the same vast system of energy and motion that connects Arctic ice flows to tropical coral reefs, mountain streams to deep ocean trenches, the moisture in morning dew to the clouds that circle our planet like thoughts made visible. Returning to our ocean world, we realize how extraordinary it is that such a place exists at all. In the vast cosmos, with its countless stars and planets, worlds covered by liquid water may be rarer than we can imagine. Most planets are too hot or too cold, too large or too small, orbiting stars too volatile or too distant to maintain the delicate conditions that allow water to exist in all three phases, solid, liquid, and gas, simultaneously on the same world. Our Earth occupies what astronomers call the Goldilocks zone, that narrow band around our star where conditions are neither too hot nor too cold, but just right for liquid water to exist on the surface. But even being in this zone isn't enough. Earth needed the right size to hold an atmosphere, the right mix of elements to create oceans, the right companion moon to stabilize its rotation, and countless other factors that aligned to create the water world we inhabit. The water that fills our oceans is itself a cosmic gift. Every drop contains hydrogen formed in the first few minutes after the Big Bang, and oxygen forged in the nuclear furnaces of ancient stars. When those stars died in spectacular supernovae, they scattered these elements across space, where they eventually coalesced into the solar system that became our home. The water in your body, the water in our oceans, the water vapor in our clouds, all of it is literally stardust. The marriage of primordial hydrogen and stellar oxygen mixed and remixed through billions of years of cosmic chemistry. But beyond its cosmic rarity, water on Earth has achieved something even more remarkable. It has become the medium through which matter learned to think, to feel, to wonder about its own existence. Every thought you're thinking as you listen to these words is happening in a brain that is roughly 75% water, electrical impulses traveling through neural networks that exist in aqueous solution. Your consciousness itself is a pattern of activity in water, a temporary whirlpool in the stream of biological processes that connect you to every other living thing on this blue planet. The ocean is not just Earth's most prominent feature, it is Earth's memory, its circulatory system, its thermostat, and its nursery all at once. It remembers the chemical composition of the atmosphere across geological ages, recorded in the shells of countless marine organisms that lived and died in its depths. It circulates heat from the tropics toward the poles, moderating temperatures and making vast regions of our planet hospitable to life. It regulates global climate by absorbing and releasing carbon dioxide, serving as both a buffer against rapid change and a participant in the slow dance of planetary evolution. And it remains, even now, life's nursery. While we've explored land and air, developed technologies that let us peer into the deepest space and the smallest particles, the ocean depths remain largely unknown to us. We've mapped the surface of Mars in greater detail than we've mapped our own ocean floors. We've catalogued the moons of Jupiter more thoroughly than we've catalogued the species living in our deep seas. The ocean holds mysteries that dwarf our imagination, entire ecosystems thriving around volcanic vents in conditions that seem impossible for life, creatures that create their own light in the eternal darkness of the deep, currents, and cycles that operate on scales of space and time that challenge our understanding. Every time we dip our hands in the ocean, we're touching water that has circulated through this planetary system for billions of years. Some of those water molecules may have fallen as rain on the first forests, flowed through the bodies of dinosaurs, risen as vapor from tropical seas, when early humans first looked out across the waves and wondered what lay beyond the horizon. The water connects us not just to the rest of life today, but to all life that has ever existed on this planet. In our thought experiment, we learned what Earth might become without its oceans, a harsh, disconnected world where life struggles to persist in scattered oases of artificial sustainability. But we live in a different world, a connected world, a blue world, where water weaves all systems together in patterns of flow and renewal that create the conditions for abundance, diversity, and wonder. The rain that falls outside your window tonight began its journey as molecules evaporated from the ocean surface, perhaps thousands of miles away. It rose into the atmosphere, condensed around microscopic particles of dust or salt, formed clouds that travelled on winds shaped by the spinning of the earth and the heating of the sun, and now returns to the land as rain that will soak into soil, feed plants, replenish groundwater, and eventually make its way back to the sea through streams and rivers that carve their own stories into the landscape. This is the world we actually inhabit, not the harsh, disconnected world of our thought experiment, but a world where every raindrop is part of a planetary circulation system, where every wave carries energy from distant storms, where every river connects mountain to sea in an unbroken flow of renewal. It's a world where water doesn't just sustain life, but creates the very possibility for life to become conscious of itself, to wonder about its origins, to imagine other worlds while marveling at the one it calls home. What, then, has this impossible journey taught us? What wisdom emerges from our imaginary wandering through a world drained of its defining feature, our witnessing of systems collapse and survivors struggle in landscapes that never were and hopefully never will be? Perhaps the most profound lesson is one of interconnectedness, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived reality that shapes every moment of our existence. In our thought experiment, we saw how the removal of the oceans didn't just eliminate marine life. It transformed weather patterns, altered the planet's rotation, disrupted magnetic fields, and changed the fundamental physics of how Earth operates as a system. Nothing existed in isolation. Every change cascaded through networks of connection that spanned from the molecular to the planetary scale. This same interconnectedness defines our actual world, though it's often invisible to us in our daily experience. The coffee you drink in the morning connects you to rainfall patterns in distant mountains, to soil microbes that help coffee plants grow, to ocean currents that moderate the climate where those plants thrive. The oxygen you breathe was produced by plants and phytoplankton through photosynthesis, a process that transforms sunlight and carbon dioxide into the atmospheric composition that makes your life possible. Your body itself is a temporary arrangement of elements that have been cycling through Earth's systems for billions of years. The calcium in your bones was once part of ancient ocean organisms. The iron in your blood was forged in stellar cores. The water in your cells has circulated through clouds and seas and countless other living things. You are not separate from Earth systems. You are one of the ways Earth has learned to be conscious of itself. In our thought experiment, we witnessed the fragility of the systems that seem most permanent and stable. The ocean, which appears eternal and unchanging on human timescales, proved vulnerable to human ingenuity and desperation. Climate patterns that have persisted for millions of years collapsed within months. Ecosystems that had evolved over vast stretches of time disappeared in the space of a single season. Yet we also witnessed resilience, the Earth's capacity to find new patterns of organization even under the most extreme conditions. Life, though vastly diminished, found ways to persist. Human communities, though struggling, discovered new forms of cooperation and adaptation. The planet itself began developing new weather patterns, new rhythms, new forms of harsh beauty adapted to its transformed condition. This suggests something important about the nature of stability and change in natural systems. What we often perceive as permanent is actually dynamic equilibrium, patterns of flow and relationship that maintain themselves through constant adjustment and adaptation. The ocean doesn't maintain its salinity through being static, but through the constant cycling of evaporation and precipitation, volcanic outgassing and sediment deposition, biological uptake and release. Stability emerges from change, not from the absence of change. The same principle applies to ecosystems, to climate patterns, to the atmospheric composition that makes our lives possible, and to the social and economic systems that structure human civilization. None of these are permanent fixtures that will persist, regardless of what we do. All of them are dynamic patterns that maintain themselves through countless feedback loops and relationships that can be disrupted if we change the conditions beyond their capacity to adapt. This understanding brings both humility and responsibility. Humility because it reminds us that the systems we depend on are far more complex and interconnected than our models can fully capture, and far more fragile than their apparent stability might suggest. Responsibility because it reveals that our actions, even when they seem small in scale, participate in planetary processes that shape the conditions for all life. But perhaps the most important lesson from our journey through the drained Earth is not about fragility or interconnectedness, but about beauty, the recognition of the extraordinary nature of ordinary existence on a water world. In imagining what we might lose, we discover what we actually have. In exploring a harsh world without oceans, we return to appreciate the gentle world of tides and rainfall, of morning dew and evening fog, of rivers that connect mountains to seas and clouds that carry moisture across continents. The beauty of our blue planet isn't just aesthetic, though anyone who has watched sunlight dance on ocean waves or listened to rain on leaves knows that it is certainly that. It's the beauty of improbable complexity, of systems so intricate and interconnected that they create conditions for consciousness to emerge from matter, for matter to become aware of itself and capable of wonder. Every time you watch clouds form and dissipate, you're witnessing the hydrological cycle that connects every part of Earth's surface to every other part. Every time you feel the cool of morning dew or the humidity of a summer evening, you're experiencing the planet's vast breathing, the exchange of moisture between land and sky that moderates temperatures and distributes the conditions for life across the globe. In our daily lives, surrounded by human-made systems and artificial environments, it's easy to forget that we're participants in planetary processes that have been operating for billions of years. But we are. Every breath connects you to the atmosphere that plants and phytoplankton have been modifying for eons. Every drink of water connects you to the hydrological cycle that has been circulating the same water molecules through living systems since life began. The wonder isn't just that these systems exist, but that they've given rise to beings capable of understanding and appreciating them. Through human consciousness, the universe has developed the capacity to know itself, to study its own processes, to imagine alternative possibilities, and to experience awe at its own complexity and beauty. Our thought experiment, our journey through the impossible world of drained oceans, ultimately brings us back to gratitude, not just for the obvious gifts of our water world, but for the privilege of being conscious participants in Earth's ongoing story. We're not outside observers studying a distant planet, but integral parts of the systems we're learning to understand, temporary arrangements of matter and energy that have achieved the remarkable capacity to wonder about our own existence. In recognizing our embeddedness in Earth's systems, we also recognize our responsibility to act as conscious participants rather than unconscious consumers. The interconnectedness that makes our lives possible also makes our choices consequential in ways that extend far beyond our immediate experience. How we live shapes the conditions for all life, now and in the future. But this responsibility need not be a burden. It can be a source of meaning, a recognition that our lives matter not just to ourselves and our immediate communities, but to the larger patterns of life and consciousness that we're part of. In caring for the systems that sustain us, we care for the possibility that consciousness and wonder will continue to emerge from matter, that future beings will have the opportunity to experience the beauty and complexity of existence on a living planet. As our impossible journey draws to a close, as we return from the harsh landscapes of our imagination to the gentle reality of our blue world, I want to thank you for joining me on this exploration of what might be lost and what we actually possess. Together, we've walked across the dried floors of vanished oceans, witnessed the struggle of survivors in a transformed world, and discovered truths about interconnectedness and beauty that can only be fully appreciated when we imagine their absence. You've traveled with me through deep time written in sediment and stone, through the collapse of familiar systems and the emergence of new patterns, through the profound loneliness of a disconnected world, and back again to the profound community of our water planet. You've been companions in thought experiments that pushed the boundaries of imagination while revealing the extraordinary nature of ordinary existence. Now, as you prepare to rest, to let your consciousness settle into the rhythms of sleep and dreams, I invite you to carry with you an awareness of the water world that surrounds and sustains you. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you might notice the sounds that connect you to planetary systems. The whisper of wind that carries moisture, evaporated from distant oceans. The gentle percussion of rain if clouds happen to be releasing their gifts above you. Or simply the quiet that comes when water in all its forms is doing its work of connection and renewal. Tonight, you may dream of water in all its forms, sunlit tropical seas where coral thrives, snowmelt streams singing their way to the ocean, or clouds rising to carry rain to distant lands. You might descend into the deep ocean, where bioluminescent life glows in eternal night, and volcanic vents nourish unique ecosystems, all part of the planet's slow, patient circulation of nutrients and energy. In waking, you may notice water anew. Dew on grass, the feel of humidity, the quiet movement through pipes that echo natural watersheds. You'll see how hills, forests, and cities shape themselves around water's presence, how it carves landscapes and sustains civilizations. Pause by a river, lake, or even a puddle, and see it as part of an ancient planetary cycle, water that has passed through countless beings, fallen on ancient forests, and flowed in deep currents. The water in your body now links you to all life. Sleep knowing tides still rise, currents still turn, and rain still falls, weaving every living thing into Earth's great pattern of renewal. The water world endures, carrying the possibility for beauty, connection, and the quiet joy of recognizing this planet as home.